Welcome to another episode of the Being and Doing podcast. Tonight with me is Cora Geroux, and the first time I have encountered Cora was as many of my other guests on Instagram. And I just said briefly before we started is that the first impression I had was like, wow, how beautiful this woman is, but in this very natural way. And then another thing I really liked about Cora is her critical spirit, because the Teaching Yoga podcast, which I listened to for 1 or 2 years now, has really taught me a lot about yoga, but in this very inquisitive and curious way. And then at the end of the day, the interesting thing about Cora is that there is a combination of curiosity and kind of systematic approach combined with compassion. So I'm very curious to get to know Cora better and to see what is her vision of success and of how did she build the success that she's kind of currently enjoying. So welcome, Cora.
Thank you. That was such a beautiful, beautiful introduction. Thank you so much for that, Aleks.
I'm glad. So the first question I want to ask, so I normally start with the question of what are some words that you identify yourself with?
I had a look at this question and I, to be honest, found it really difficult to think about it. One, I will start off the bat with, I think I'm funny. So I always tell people that I'm hilarious. So I associate that with myself. I don't know if anyone else does, but I do. So, that was the question. So we'll go there. Another word might be tenacious. Like I have quite a, not that I enjoy falling down, but like a fall down, get back up kind of situation that I tend to be able to keep going, even when things aren't always working out the way I would have hoped. And I love the word compassion, but I don't know if I'm going to put it in there. It's like, I would love to steal that, but I don't know if I can say that about myself. But I will say that I'm caring. I do care. I really do care about people. Sometimes I care about people too much, but I think that's an okay quality to have. I'll go with that. So, I'd say those 3 words.
And so talking about caring, that's something that I really like when people are caring and they are able to build a business around it in a caring and soulful manner, which is what I guess you're trying to do yourself and teach other people to do. So can you talk a bit more about that, for example? How do you kind of balance between the care and how do you kind of transform it in a way so that you can help people, but then still in a sustainable manner for you?
Well, I think the first thing when you're thinking about business and having that sort of caring lens to it is just to really help people feel seen and heard. So in a business, it's inevitable that people are going to have issues with your product, or I do a lot of education. So it involves like Zoom calls and things like that. So people will just not get the invite, or the link will be broken, or they won't show up at the right time or whatever. So, and then that makes people feel upset or uncomfortable, which is fair enough. And I think as long as you hear what they have to say, take it on board, and real, I guess it's like super simple, but like really treat people like a real person, not just someone that you're doing a transaction with, but someone you have a relationship with. Yes, it's a professional business relationship, but all the rules from other relationships still apply. Like that's one thing that I'm just like, well, it's a business relationship, but it's still a relationship. You still want to connect with that person. So I think for me, that's one of the biggest things is just making people feel seen and heard, whatever part of the process they're in, whether they're having a great experience, whether they're frustrated with something that's going on, and letting them know that you care. Like even I will say, like, I care. I know this isn't working for you, but I care about fixing it. And I can do this because I have a small business. I'm not sure how well it will scale. But if someone has an issue I will often get on a Zoom call with them or make a video tutorial for them, like walking them through the process. Like if they can't log in, for example, for whatever reason to their membership area, it's like, hey, Aleks, I'm going to walk you through a special video for you on teaching you how to log in. So I think just like having things be personal and adapted to what people need. But we'll see how that goes as I grow and I scale. I might have to think creatively about how to have that same level of care for people when instead of hundreds of people we're working with, it's thousands of people. I'd probably be on my computer all day making explainer videos if I did it that way. So yeah, that's kind of my approach that I've been taking so far.
And I'm curious, so you have done several different stages in your business. So what would you define in terms of business, that what place are you in now?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot because we just hit our 12-month mark. Mm-hmm. And I've had previous businesses before the one that I run now. So that's another lifetime. They're all yoga related, but they were in person. And the business I run now is online. So the current business I have is 12 months old, 12 months in a week. But I think we're still in the startup phase, but just coming out the other side. And what I'm using to think about that is that throughout the last 12 months, our products have been developing. So we have 3 different products in my business at the moment, and those have really been taking shape over the last 12 months. And so I feel like once we are completely, those products are like polished up and they're really good to where I'm not going to tweak them too much more. I'm sure I always will, but when they feel a bit more robust, I feel like maybe we're moving out of the startup phase. But and we're very close to that. Next couple of months we'll be out of that, and we'll probably be like an early mid-stage business at that time. But yeah, so I think we're ending our startup phase, but we're still in it a little bit.
So I would like to ask you many questions, but let's keep a little bit on the business side, and then we will go back into the Cora side. Cool. You have seen many life cycles of businesses, probably. And I'm curious, how was the process of understanding where in the life cycle you are, and how difficult for you it was to let go? Because it feels that sometimes you attach to your business in a very relationship kind of manner. And then at some point you need to change shape and drift. And how do you do that?
Well, when you're thinking about like the stages of business, startup is the hardest, but also the most exciting, because you literally have no idea if it's going to work. So every time something works, it's this thrill of like, oh my God, it might actually be happening. So I would say like there's startup phase. And then when you get through that phase, I'll probably, 18 months is where I'm going to probably be there for myself currently. Then like that sort of like just maintenance phase in the middle of like, mid-stage, it can be good because you have some certainty in that you can make predictions about sales, and you can make predictions about expenses and that sort of thing, because all of that is known. But I have felt, and I know someone else I've started a business with felt this way as well, it almost became boring. And I don't want to say that in a bad way, because sometimes boring is really good. Like sometimes boring is what you want. But there was no thrill anymore of creating something brand new and seeing if it will work or not, taking that risk, that challenge, and figuring it all out. So, and then to be honest, I haven't worked at a late stage business. So I've always been in that startup and in that mid development stage. I don't know exactly what it's like at a late stage business, but I'm assuming it would be much more comfortable. You know what's coming, what's going on. And
I'm curious, what is the reason that you have not pivoted to a more late stage part?
Yep. Yeah, it's a long answer that has legal ramifications. So I'm going to be as brief as possible, not for not wanting to share, but just for trying to respect some documents that were signed. It was a values misalignment with my yoga studios that I was running that I decided to leave. And then my own business, which was yoga teacher training, from leaving the yoga studios. So one was leaving by choice. And it was just it was a lesson really that for me, I probably not going to have business partners in the future. And I learned that through having them. So it's like, trial and error. Mm-hmm. So there was a conscious choice to leave that. And then my other business, which was running much longer, which maybe we were at late stage. I was running it for 5 or 6 years of running yoga teacher trainings. That business wasn't a choice. And I wasn't able to do it anymore just to honor that non-compete. So, so that's my short answer, which I know doesn't get into any good details or anything, but that's kind of the situation.
Yeah. I mean, we can still explore around different topics of that, which don't necessarily need to touch. But I'll just go back to Cora and thinking about your successes, and even you have not continued on the same path. I feel what I see successful about you is the fact that you are enjoying it. And I'm curious, what is your personal definition of success? And how do you measure up yourself against yourself, let's say?
This is such a good question. And I have been thinking about it for a long time, since I read your, when you sent these over to me. And I don't think I have a textbook, well-defined answer. But I think for me, if I were to put it, it's not going to be super beautiful and concise, but if I were to think about it, success for me really means that I have freedom in what I do, and I can unpack that a little bit. Mm-hmm. And what I'm experiencing in my business is a choice. So freedom looks different to different people. But for me, it means that I'm not super tightly scheduled all the time, and that I can spend a lot of time in creative work, which is my sort of zone of genius. So there's freedom in the actual running of the business, meaning that I have a team and I have support, which I do, but that will probably continue to expand so that my time is freed up a little bit more so that I can do the work that I love, not all of the business admin that a company is running a business. So there's that. And then the other part of success for me is that everything that's going on in the business is a choice. And that can be on a lot of different levels. If for example, I wouldn't feel successful if the amount of money that I was making was not what I was choosing to make. Mm-hmm. Right. But if I can say I want to make a certain amount of money and I know that we can get there and this is a choice, you would choose to make less in your business so that you can have more freedom. And I think that's fine. So for me, it's not a dollar value, because I think we go through different stages of life where financial income is more important than others. If you're buying a house or supporting a family, obviously you need more money to do that. So having freedom and choice in my business is a huge indicator of success for me. And it even comes down to choice, like being able to choose the podcast guests that I want, and having full control over that, rather than being I really like that guest, but they're not saying yes to me. So that's not a choice, right? That's me being just, dealing with the circumstances that I have. So those two things are huge. And also quite broad in that it can look really different at different times, because I don't buy into an idea of success that it's you have a car, the specific car and the specific house and the specific income, because what I've witnessed, and I have never gone down that path. I've been a yoga teacher since I was 23. So you're not doing that shit on a yoga teacher salary. But I have witnessed a lot of friends go down that path, and for most of them, not all, it becomes more of a burden than anything else. That, that they have this great salary, but they're not able to free up their time or make choices about what they're doing in a way that actually leaves them feeling fulfilled. So yeah, so it's kind of like a vague answer, but it's one that you can grow with.
So that's actually my next question. Is this answer allows for flexibility in decision making over a lifetime, let's say? And I'm curious what keeps you flexible in your own mind. Because I feel in order to live such a lifestyle where things are constantly changing and you're constantly redefining things, it is very energy demanding. So I'm curious, what is your process of understanding stuckness and getting unstuck?
Yeah, I think I'm going to give an answer that won't be very helpful to many people listening, but it's the truth. So I'll just go there. I have a personality that is super comfortable with change. And so it's not something I learned. I always think that we can be the best teachers on things that we used to be very bad at, but we have learned to be better at over time. Like I used to be a great teacher of handstands when I taught yoga because I was really bad at them. So I had to work at it and learn everything I could and be super diligent and know every little detail about how to get into a handstand, where someone who is really good at it from the beginning might not be the best teacher because they don't have that whole entire process that they've gone through. They could just do it. So when they teach it, it's like, well, just put your hands here and kick your legs up and boom, you're there. So my answer about stuckness and being comfortable with change, I'm kind of like the handstand teacher who could just do it. It's not always a desirable quality, I will say that, but it from a young age, I have been able to adapt to change pretty easily. Like, there was a period of time in my life where my partner and I were house sitting, meaning we would just move every couple of weeks and live in different people's homes and take care of their pets when they were away. And that in itself is pretty destabilizing. And, we live in a permanent house now and we're pretty happy to do that. But I do think that it was a natural ability to be able to manage change. But I will say that I've also suffered from anxiety for the most of my adult life. And there are certain practices that have helped me with that: yoga, meditation, how I eat, making sure I exercise properly, therapy. So I'm doing a lot of shit, but for anyone who feels stuck, I would say, and I have a lot of people like this close to me and in my life, it's just start with baby steps for anything that you're doing. It's like, if you're here and you want to go there and there feels like there's this, I feel stuck and I'm not sure how to proceed. What's the smallest thing that you could do that would be a step in that direction? And then it can feel more manageable. Whereas I'll be like, okay, I'm here and I want to go there. Let's just leap. And that can create a lot of chaos. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but yeah.
So I'm curious. Also, you mentioned therapy, and I didn't know you have a bachelor in psychology. So I'm curious. Where was the shift from maybe wanting to be a psychologist into yoga yoga teaching, and then teacher training, and everything that followed?
So I love learning and I love school. I was one of the lucky people that actually my brain fit in with the way school worked. I know for the vast majority of people, the way the school system runs does not work for them. But I just happened to be a person who it did. And so I really love learning, really love school. When I was 18, went to university like most people or many people do. And, went through a couple of majors. Like I had an English major and a criminology major, and then ended up with a psych major, really because of my anxiety. And I wanted to learn how to better deal with that and to help other people. The reason why I went into yoga was that I didn't want to take on more debt to continue my education. So all over the world, universities cost different things. In Canada, it's basically like you just take out loans if you're not independently wealthy. And by the time I had finished my undergraduate degree, I was like the way that I want to start my life with accruing more debt. So I did seriously consider getting my master's in psychology. Maybe I still will at some point. Who knows? Probably not in psychology. I'll do something else. But I wanted a way to earn a living and just take a break from that sort of educational system. And when I was looking at working in psychology, I would work in a lab and make $10 an hour was my career path after having an undergrad. And I was pretty disillusioned by that, being like, I just spent like 5 years and 50 grand on this, and I'm qualified for a job that makes $10 an hour. Like I could just work at Starbucks and make the same thing. So I felt pretty disillusioned with that, and loved school, and would, go back if it wasn't for like the massive debt that I was in at the time. But I had been practicing yoga throughout my university career as a way to manage my own anxiety, and found that it was super effective and super helpful. So I sort of pivoted with the intention being the same, of like helping people and understanding my inner life a little bit better. But with yoga, like, to be fully transparent, it was like, oh, I can do a course in a month and get a job and make, 50 or 60 bucks a class. I'm going to do that. So it was literally as soon as I graduated, I think within the month of graduating and getting my degree, I was training as a yoga teacher. And then I was living in Vancouver at the time. And when I came back from my yoga teacher training, I was like, right, I'm going to get a job. So I just started applying to all these different yoga studios. And I taught for a decade after that. So a good 10 years of teaching full time. I did have ups and downs where I was like, am I going to keep doing this? Am I going to pivot onto a different track? But eventually started doing, longer things like workshops and retreats and teacher training, and then eventually owning a couple of studios. So, yeah.
And I'm curious, in your yoga teacher journey, what did you find the most challenging in becoming a better yoga teacher, let's say?
At the beginning, for me, it was really about visibility and being seen. So I was pretty shy. I know that people can't see that in me. People think I'm extroverted, but I'm a pretty massive introvert and pretty shy. So I didn't really think about the fact that teaching yoga was very similar to public speaking. And so that held me back for a long time. I did teach straight away and consistently, but it was hard for me to reveal who I really was in my yoga classes. And that can create a barrier between you and the students. So if you're not showing up fully, it's hard for them to connect with you and for them to, be themselves when they're practicing. So I think that was one of the biggest barriers for me in becoming a better teacher, is having that like vulnerability and willingness to be seen and willingness to put myself out there. Was probably like the biggest hurdle that made the biggest difference when I was like, okay, I'm going to commit to showing up properly as myself when I'm in the classroom. I think that had the biggest impact on me as a teacher, and I think had the biggest probably impact on my students.
And I'm sorry to interrupt.
Other than that, yeah, go for it.
Just what does it mean for you to show up as yourself? So what did you feel was not yourself in the way you were showing up?
I have a super clear example, or a bunch of super clear examples. So, number one, I swear, for better or worse. My natural language includes swearing. And I didn't do that in my yoga classes because it's, a group, a public place. You want to be a little bit more proper, and not everybody wants to hear that. So one of the things was I just started using my natural language. So I didn't censor myself in the way that I spoke, was one of the ways that I sort of peeled back that layer, so that if someone caught me downstairs at the pub after yoga, because one of the studios I used to teach at was upstairs, and downstairs there was a pub. And if I went there to meet a friend after I taught class and one of my students walked by, the language and how I was presenting myself would be have congruence. There would be congruence between who I was in the classroom and who I was outside. So one of the first things was my language, making sure that was accurate and not something that's put on to feel that I felt like I should or I had to do. Another thing is my music taste. So when I first started teaching, I taught a style of yoga where you couldn't use music. But as I continued on, I was able to play music in class. And I had an idea that people come to yoga to relax and to chill out. And so I should play a certain type of music. And I did that for a long time. And I thought it was boring. I was like, this is just so boring. And I would never listen to this. So I, again, made a conscious choice to make playlists that I was interested in and that I would genuinely practice to, even though my taste in music won't be for everybody. And especially I was teaching in a very upper middle class, predominantly very wealthy white neighborhood. And I listened to music that I assumed those people aren't interested in or would maybe be offended by. Mm-hmm. So I started playing the music that I wanted to play. And then also the style of yoga I was practicing was very different than the style of yoga I was teaching. I would say at the time it was like a functional hatha. So I used a lot of movements that were not traditional yoga movements. Because as you picked up on in the questions, I've had some injuries. So I've had to change my practice quite dramatically. But I was still teaching like the popular style. It was like vinyasa flow. But I didn't practice that myself. So I started teaching in a way that maybe wasn't as popular because it was different. It was new. People had to break their old patterns to be able to do what I was asking them. So even in the yoga, me showing up fully is teaching what I genuinely believed in, not what was popular, which, mm-hmm. is tough sometimes, especially if your business relies on people showing up.
Yeah. So this is also an interesting thing that in this path, you had a lot of assumptions. And I'm curious, did you allow yourself to test them by talking to your students and saying, I assume this is what you like, but are you ready to try something new if I offer this to you? So how did that process look like for you?
Yeah, I didn't ask them. I just changed it. And it was super interesting because those assumptions in part were correct and then in part were not. So, I had a few students who were in their 70s who came to my classes, and when I started using my natural language and playing my dirty R&B in the background and teaching what I wanted to teach, they enjoyed my classes more. And I was like, I wouldn't have expected that. They came every week. They were like, oh, this is so great. I have to come do another Cora class, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't expect that. Some of those students, I expected them to be like, whoa, I'm out of here. So those assumptions got challenged in part, but then there were definitely other students who complained and who left and who didn't want to be anywhere near me in that class environment. So so I think assumptions usually have a nugget of truth, but they're not the whole truth, right?
Yeah. And we can also come to the injury part because I'm very curious. I always feel in yoga when I'm doing postures is that some postures are just not meant for my body. And I always felt like this self-protective kind of mechanism where I'm like, okay, this doesn't feel like I should go there. But then there's so much imagery on Instagram and everywhere, and you just feel like that's the destination. So I'm curious about your journey in that sense, and how did this injury arise, and how did you go through all that process?
Yeah, so I've had lots of yoga-related injuries. There were probably two main ones. One where I damaged the cartilage in my knee, and then another where I had bursitis in my hip. That one's a little bit harder to pin down.
And can you be more specific?
But it's inflammation.
In like, how did you get to know that this is from yoga, or was this over time, or it was one time thing? And
So both of them were over time, which is why it's very difficult to attribute it to specifically yoga, because most yoga injuries don't happen in an instant in a yoga class. Especially with regular practitioners, they're cumulative and happen over time from repetitive strain. So they're usually in that sort of category. Not always. Yeah. So the first one, when I damaged the cartilage in my knee, both of these injuries left me unable to walk for a period of time. So they weren't small, but I luckily have been able to heal them without surgery, mostly. The first one I had a very similar situation to what you were describing, where I was doing a posture. I'm trying to think of the Sanskrit name, but I don't think I can remember it. I was practicing Ashtanga, and you are sitting on the ground on your butt with one leg folded back. So one leg is in like a kneeling position, and the other leg is out straight, like it would be in a seated forward bend. And then you fold forward over that. So you've got your butt on the ground, one leg folded like you're kneeling, one leg stretching out straight. And for most people, their pelvis will be uneven in that position. So the leg that is stretching out straight, that butt cheek and sit bone will be on the ground. And the one for the leg folded back will be off the ground, depending on how much range of motion you have in your hips and your knees. Some people can have both sit bones on the ground. So I was practicing that pose daily because it was part of the sequence that I was doing, which was the same sequence every day. And when my body goes into that shape, I have the feeling that you have, which is, I don't feel very good here. Something feels wrong. I feel self-protective. And that sensation was all concentrated in my knee of the leg that was folded back. I was getting a lot of adjustments at that time. And the adjustments that I was getting was to push the lifted hip down. So the hip that was on the leg folded back, push that down so my pelvis would level out. I don't have great internal rotation. So part of my body that allowed me to do that, it's just naturally the way my hips are designed. I don't have a lot of range there. So doing that movement super repetitively and getting that adjustment, which deepened the internal rotation, which already was pretty limited, the force of that just traveled down to my knee. And it hurt every day when I did it. I talked to my teachers and they said, just watch it. If it gets worse, maybe do a little bit less. But the place that I was practicing wasn't super aware of at the time that people's bodies are different. They held a philosophy that every body can do every pose. That's not really accurate anymore. But that just meant that I wasn't able to use props, or I wasn't able to change the pose to suit my body or anything. And, I even tried using props and I got told no. So doing that repeatedly over and over and over and over and over again, I eventually, I didn't tear, I didn't get an MRI on it, but I did go to a physio. Eventually they just said, look, you've probably damaged the cartilage in your knee, and that's why you can't bend it fully or straighten it fully or bear weight on it. So you just have to rest. So I had to teach yoga without being able to bend my leg for a couple of months.
So I'm sorry. So I'm curious, actually, how did that affect you, the way you teach yoga and the way you approach yoga now?
Yeah, it completely changed it. So I had to reckon with the fact and learn, why did I get injured? And so it made me understand anatomy a lot better. It made me understand individual variation a lot better. Like there were a lot of people in the group who could do that pose without pain, but why was I getting pain? So it made me go on an exploration of how people's bodies are different. And also my teaching method, so my style of teaching changed, which, one of the reasons why it became more of like a functional hatha that included movements from outside of yoga, because even if a movement is super great for your body, if you only do that movement, you will get repetitive strain. So for me, it's like having a larger repertoire of shapes is important. So it changed my style of teaching, but also my teaching methodology, in that I recognized that if someone is getting that feeling that you described, or that I said, that I was like, wow, I actually was just like, this hurts. Like, this is really painful every time I do it. That person's body is way smarter than an external teacher. So it humbled me in a way that it made me have a firsthand experience that my students know their bodies better than I do. And I need to respect that as a teacher. And so I brought in a more trauma-informed approach into what I was doing as well, so that I was aware, I had a better knowledge of anatomy, better understanding of just individual variation, and then more of an understanding of empowering a student rather than me having all the answers, because my teachers didn't, and the answers they gave me led me to be more injured.
And I'm curious there, when you say empowering the student, how does that change your language while teaching? So how does that reflect the language?
Well, I think the biggest thing comes down to choice. So instead of telling your students what to do, it's giving people options and allowing people to choose for themselves. It's also bringing inquiry into the teaching methodology. So let's say we were in that pose, or let's say down dog, because I can remember the name of that. It's been a while. I haven't taught a yoga class for over a year, so it's been a while. So let's say someone is in downward facing dog. You could, instead of saying, place your hands shoulder width apart with your index finger facing forward, you could invite someone, start with your hands shoulder width apart and your index finger facing forward. Then take your hands wider and notice, how does that feel? Then move your hands closer together. Which one do you prefer? Settle into a place that feels good in your body, adjust the position of your hands. So just in that little example with bringing people into their body through inviting them to experiment with the shapes allows them to arrive in a place that is probably more suited to their body than anything that I could prescribe from the outside. So instead of giving someone a direct cue, it's inviting them to experiment with it, usually within certain bounds. You want to give people some bounds, because like if they're new to yoga, they don't know what they're doing. So you just give them a container, but let them experiment within that container.
That's actually quite beautiful and translatable to life in a way, because the only way through, so the only way to reach the end is through, but you can go through only through exploring what really feels good to you. And I feel sometimes that, just a small change in the language you use as a yoga teacher can translate in life, and maybe change the way we talk to ourselves. So, I mean, I really like that you mentioned this, and I think this is changing a lot in the community, but I can imagine that there was a lot of dogmatism before, and I have not experienced myself that dogmatism, because I had from the start a very good yoga teacher, but I can empathize how is it just not to have that in the beginning. And I'm curious, I saw while I was preparing the thumbnail for my YouTube, I saw on the picture you sent me that you have a tattoo which says "I'm enough," and I was curious about the story of the tattoo, if you're willing to share.
Sure. Well, I appreciate that, but it's actually slightly different. It just says "good enough."
Good enough. Sorry.
And good enough. Yeah, no, it's cool. But I think that because it generates a lot of conversation, like even if I'm going to order a sandwich at a restaurant and I stand at the counter and the person at the checkout counter can see it they will comment on it. So it's something that people really resonate with and respond to, even strangers. And I think the usual interpretation people have of it is exactly what you've just said, like, I'm enough. And while I love that interpretation, I actually got it for another reason, which is when I was teaching yoga, I had several private clients, as you do as a yoga teacher. And one of my private clients was a very, very wealthy woman. And she was not independently wealthy. She had earned it. She had worked her way up and started a hedge fund, which I don't even know what that is all these years later, but started a hedge fund that she sold to a French bank. And so she was completely self-made, and she was single as well. She had a daughter. So a single mom, like, not, her money was not handed down through her family. She created this herself. And so I was really inspired by her. And we would do the yoga class, like the yoga session in her beautiful home. And then afterwards we would have like 5-10 minutes to chat about whatever, you know? And often that went towards business because I was really interested in business and she was very successful in business. So one of the pieces of advice that she gave me that I really struggled to take on and really struggled to understand and really struggled to accept was that you need to get any project you're working on, whether that's a yoga studio, a podcast, a hedge fund, whatever it is, any project that you're doing, you need to get it until it's 80% done, 80% perfect, and then you need to ship it. Meaning you need to put it out into the world. You need to sell it to the bank. You need to release the podcast or start the business. And then you need to move on to the next project. She said, okay, get it to 80% and move on. And when she first told me this, I kind of was just like, oh, okay, whatever. And then went away and been thinking about it until the next week when she and I met up again for our next yoga lesson. And by the next week, I had done some little calculations and came back to her and said, hey, so I remember when you told me about that, like, get it to 80% and then move on. Did you know that 80% is a B? Like, if you're getting grades in school? Because I was a perfectionist. I had my very first panic attack when I got a B in uni for the first time. So super perfectionist. And said to her, I was like, do you know that that's a B? So you're essentially saying you should get a B's grade in anything that you do and then just move on. And I was not aware of that way of thinking. I was like, if you don't get an A, you're not good enough, or the project isn't good enough or whatever. And she's like, yeah, I know. And I was like, okay, about this idea of getting a project to the point where it's good enough. That's what she said. You just need to get it to the point where it's good enough. And that extra 20% is a waste of time. She's like, you could be starting a new project, creating a new venture, launching something else, and that you don't get a return on your investment for that extra 20%. So the reason that I have the tattoo is to help me remember about those perfectionist tendencies that I have and how they're not actually serving me in a way that I think they are. So it's sort of my motto is to get something to the point where it's good enough and then release it to the world. Even if you're not, or I'm not super happy with every tiny little detail about it, it's just to move on and get it done.
And I'm curious about those perfectionist tendencies from a very personal standpoint. Like, how much did you explore? What is the assumption, the bias, the place where they are coming from, and how do you live with them, basically?
Yeah, so I have done a lot of exploring around this, and I have to be honest that it's not something I have fully overcome. Hence the tattoo, right? Because I need a reminder. I need a consistent reminder. But for me, I think the root of it comes down to something deeper, which you touched on, is that if something's not perfect that I put out into the world, in my opinion, that opens me up to criticism or opens me up to letting people down, like if there are spelling mistakes in something or whatever. And those things matter to me because there's a deep-seated fear of, am I enough? Right. And so I think it comes down to that, wanting my work to be so impeccable that that reflects on me being impeccable. But the truth is, nobody's that impeccable, right? Like everybody has flaws and nobody's perfect. But so there's that. And when other people are involved, I have a tendency, which I'm really trying to tackle now, which is that I want everyone to like me, and I'm like a people pleaser. So I really hate disappointing people. So the perfectionism comes in there too, because you want to make sure that there's never a reason for someone to be disappointed, or there's never a reason to let someone down, or there's never a reason for someone to not like you. So like, if you say something, some people will like it and some people won't. So it's safer to almost not say anything. Do you know what I mean? So I think it all comes down to that inner work, which is not easy, but the way that I've ever done anything is just to fumble through it. So the perfectionist tendency, I just implemented it, meaning that I would release things before I felt they were perfect, and just bear the consequences and desensitize myself to them. So it's just like, okay, like the other day, God, we released a podcast and spelt the guest name incorrectly.
Oh yeah.
That was terrible.
It sounds like a nightmare, yes.
Yeah, it's terrible. And the guest was very gracious, right? Didn't make me feel bad about it or anything, but it was like I felt so terrible about it. But the more you do those things and that sort of stuff happens, you just get used to it as, okay, this is not the end of the world. I really wished it didn't happen, but we just need to move on. And I think managing a perfectionist tendency or streak, it's just that you put out work that is 80%, and you're okay with the fact that your paper will have some red lines through it from your professor, So it's just desensitization, I think, which is not fun.
I'm actually curious, because for me, the other side of the coin of perfectionism is compassion. So like you can, if you build enough compassion for yourself, and for the humanity in yourself, then somehow these tendencies are dissipating. So I'm curious, how do you build compassion towards yourself?
This has been a huge piece of my journey. Like massive. And it's if I could say to anyone, I've even got my boyfriend reading the audiobook of it or listening to the audiobook on this topic, it's to read the work of Kristin Neff. I don't know if you've heard of her.
I haven't.
She's a self-compassion researcher and has translated a lot of what she's found in research into material that is consumable by the public, books and talks and, that sort of thing. And reading her book was I think it's called Self-Compassion, How to Stop Beating Yourself Up, I think is the title of the book. Reading that book profoundly changed my life because it teaches you strategies for how to manage things like when you spell your guest's name wrong. And because living in a human world, we all make mistakes. We all mess up. Even if you're a perfectionist and you really try and control that, it's going to happen at some time. Things are going to be out of your control and something is going to happen that's not what you planned. So one of the biggest practices that I actually do, which sounds incredibly lame, but I do it all the time, is to talk to yourself in your inner voice the way you would talk to someone you care about, your best friend, a child, your niece, someone that you have sort of unconditional positive regard for. My best friend lives in Vancouver. We've been best friends for 15 years. And no matter what she does in her life, I feel unconditional positive regard for her, right? So she's the person who I mirror it towards. And she's like, this and this and this happened. And I'm like, it's okay. You're going to be fine. Like, you've done this before. And so that soothing, calming talk that you would give to someone you care about when they're going through something challenging is the same way that you talk to yourself. So literally, it's self-soothing. It's like, it's going to be okay. You didn't mean to spell that person's name correctly or incorrectly. And it's like, you've repaired it. You've apologized. You've changed the graphic. It's okay. Everybody makes mistakes. You literally, like, when you're feeling in the biggest like shame spiral of not getting something right, it's you self-soothe with your inner dialogue. So that's one tool in her book. She has a lot more, but that's the one that I use quite often. And just reflecting on the fact that, as you've said, like, there's a shared humanity.
Yeah.
Everyone is going to make mistakes. I'm not alone in making a mistake. I'm sure someone else has misspelled someone's name before in a time that it mattered, So yeah, that's one of the big things I do.
So thank you for that, because it's something that I haven't considered myself. So I think it's something I might start doing as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you mentioned Vancouver and having your best friend there. And actually, I'm amazed by the change you made going from Canada to Australia. So I'm curious first, how did that change happen? And what are all the thoughts and feelings and everything that this change has brought up in you?
Yeah. So I grew up in Nova Scotia, which is on the east coast of Canada, not too far from London. I actually looked it up, and it's only a 5-hour flight. So it's super close. When you live in Australia, 5 hours seems like nothing. So, but when I was 18, I moved to Vancouver because Nova Scotia is beautiful and dull, for an 18-year-old. So,
sorry, can I ask, Nova Scotia, is it the place? I don't know if you watched Anne with an E.
Yes.
Is that the place where she?
Yes, it's a different province, but Anne with an E was I don't know if it was filmed there, but it took place on an island called Prince Edward Island. And I grew up just across the water from that. So probably closer than, like, how there's like Ireland and England. There was just like a little channel in between where I was and where Anne with an E, but I think it's even smaller, the distance. So yeah, that's where I grew up. It's beautiful, but it's like, I think there's like, gosh, is there like 400,000 people, I think, in the capital city? So it's like, it's small.
And can I just like ask?
Yeah.
Because I was just amazed by the still life that you get there. And so I'm curious, did you grow up in that still life and then wanted something more? But are you longing for the still life sometimes?
Yeah. So the exact thing that you described. So I grew up on a dirt road, and like we had the red dirt roads, like Anne with an E, and the thing is all red. It's the same thing. I grew up on a dirt road. There were 300 people in my high school from grade 7 to 12 that traveled from an hour to get to that school. So the population is very minimal. And yeah, when I was a kid, I grew up like running through the fields and not having to like worry about stranger danger or like anything like that. It was a pretty idyllic childhood. And so, yeah, absolutely grew up in that way. But when I became a teenager, I really wanted to see more of the world, museums and books and fashion and nightlife and all the things that you get when you live in a metropolitan area. So, yeah, I actually got the award at my high school for the person who was moving the furthest away. It's like, great. I'm like, I'm just getting out of here. And yes, I do crave that now. My partner and I are actually considering moving to Nova Scotia. I don't know if it'll happen or not, but it's one of the potential future plans we have in the works. So yeah, I do crave that again as I'm older. I'm 35. So, I've had a good, however many years that is, 18 to 35, living in a super urban area. So yeah. So when I was 18, I moved to Vancouver and did my uni degree there, became a yoga teacher there, all of that sort of thing. And I did the most cliche thing that I think anyone does, which is when I was 25, I met an Australian man, fell in love with an Australian man, and he wanted to move back to Australia. And I said, and he's like, will you come with me? And the original plan was just to go for a year, like on a working holiday visa, see if I like it. If I like it, great. If I don't like it, I can go back to Canada. So he and I moved to Sydney in 2011. So that was 10 years ago. And it was really challenging, to be honest. My grandmother passed away right as soon as I moved here, and she and I were next door neighbors my whole life. So I was like super close with her, which is also like, you know, what a privileged upbringing to have like your grandmother live next door and I could just run through the field to get to her house. It was beautiful. But we're really close, and she passed away, and I didn't have family support. I couldn't go back to the funeral because I had literally just flown to Australia the week before. And I didn't connect with my partner's friends. So I felt like, I thought I was going to have like this instant network of friends, but it didn't go that way. And I wasn't teaching yoga. I took a 6-month break from teaching yoga, which is another story. So I felt a bit alienated and alone, and it took me a while to settle into life here. But ultimately, I love it. I love it. I love it here. You know, my partner and I, yes, we're considering moving back to Nova Scotia because property prices are very good there. And they're very expensive in Sydney. So yeah, but Australia has been a really wonderful place to live for the last decade. You know, it's warm, it's beautiful. There's lots of space, you know, good. And where we are in Sydney, there's good, different stuff going on. So yeah.
Yeah. And I'm curious about that time of the move, because it's something that I experience almost each time I move, is that it brings up all the triggers that you have about loneliness, everything from your childhood onwards. And I'm curious, how did you use that time to restructure, to rebuild, and almost like, you know, kind of take the system out, like take the viruses out of the system, or how did you experience those periods?
Yeah, so there was an interesting set of events that happened that sort of shaped my course here in Australia. The first one is that just a couple of days after we landed, maybe 2 or 3 days, I went to a Vipassana meditation retreat for the first time. So for anyone listening who's not familiar with that, it's a 10-day retreat that is silent. You don't speak for 10 days, and you meditate for like 12 hours a day. So, and that's all you do. Like literally there's nothing else. So doing that within a few days of moving to a new country, really did exactly what you've said in terms of rewiring my whole experience of who I was and what I wanted and all of those sorts of things. I had a really interesting spiritual experience while I was on that retreat. It was when my grandmother passed away. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before, but I actually had a vision of her as she was dying. And I didn't know that it was real. Because how do you know that's real? And it's also silent, right? So I'm just thinking, I must have a deep-seated fear of her death and I'm just processing it and blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the retreat leaders told me, hey, your grandmother passed away. We didn't tell you because we thought it would be great for you to finish the retreat. So I had this weird spiritual experience, or I don't know if it was spiritual, but like paranormal. I don't know what it was, but had this experience that wasn't in my normal repertoire of experience. Then found out that she passed away right at the end of the retreat. And you're pretty raw at the end of that retreat because you've just been in silence for 10 days and dealing with all your shit. And the decision that was made between my mom and the retreat leaders to not tell me, I got really angry at that because it meant I couldn't go to her funeral. So like I had just landed, it would be like I would have had to be on a flight the next day and I just couldn't figure that out. So I was angry with that. So coming out of that and being in a new country with all of, you know, people I'm not connecting with, and we were living at my then partner's dad's house, so I didn't have like a lot of privacy. It absolutely rewired my entire experience, but I will say that I don't know if that was a choice. Like, I didn't think, oh, this would be really great to work on my shit, start fresh.
Yeah.
It was just kind of like I was left very raw and confused and angry and lonely. And so through that period, the change happened, right? But it wasn't necessarily intentional or planned. It was just one of those things that situations that you find yourself in.
Yeah. Well, that it sounds very, very challenging. Yes.
Yeah.
And then actually one of the questions is also, what is a pain that has shaped you in your life and that you're willing to share? So it kind of ties into what we are just talking about now.
Yeah, that is a great question. I've had a lot. Like, I think like most people have, the experience of being human is one of contrast, right? We have these beautiful, joyous experiences that take us to the ultimate highs, and then we have the lowest of the lows. So there was that experience that definitely shaped part of who I was, and it, which was amazing. And then, even leaving the studios, I learned it was a super dark time for me as well, because my plans had to change in an instant because it didn't end the way I anticipated it ending. So I was basically homeless with no money and couldn't work. And I didn't plan for that, right? Nobody usually plans for that. Usually you have better plans in place so that doesn't happen. But that was just the way it went. So that was pretty dark at that time. And I did have a very supportive partner, so that we were able to figure our shit out. But that was one of the periods where we were house sitting, because it was like, let's just find something immediate. But that experience has really, really, really shaped me in terms of like the biggest lesson that I've learned from that. And it's on the background of my phone, like the thing of my phone and like my desktop. It's like something that I'm trying to really remember, is that for me, a lesson that I've had to learn is to trust my own sense of what is right and not outsource that to someone else. So it can be on the micro level or on the macro level in big scenarios. And there were multiple experiences that I had where I had a gut feeling about something, and I looked outside of myself to other people who I thought I respected or who I thought were older than me or had more experience. And I asked them what they thought. And if their opinion about what I should do was different than my own, I would trust their opinion. And I have since learned that doesn't work well for me. That when I have this gut feeling, for me personally, I can't make this assumption for anyone else, but it is crucial that I listen to that. And like, it's even as little as having someone on my podcast that I don't want to have, but I feel like I have to have that person on my podcast for whatever reason, or I don't want to say no or anything like that. And it's like, I should have just trusted my instinct, because something goes wrong with that interview, or it's like, whatever. So that pain of outsourcing my own judgment to other people and then feeling the consequences of that has really shaped where I'm at right now. And it's like, okay, what do I want in this situation? And it goes against everything we're taught usually, is to not be selfish. Is to not put yourself first, and to not say, well, I know you all think I should do that, but for me, it doesn't feel right, so I'm not going to. It's a very hard lesson for me to learn, but it's that's kind of my process, something that's really shaped me at the moment.
It's really funny because exactly the same thing happened to me. I mean, just coming from a different space, but it just reminds me. Tim Ferriss repeats this in his podcast often. It's be a good animal, trust your instincts, and actually the question I had is, what is your process to sense yourself and to be present with what you feel and what you feel is right for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is what I'm exploring right now. And there are some things. I love that Tim Ferriss quote. I hadn't heard it before.
I don't know if it's his. I just know he mentions it. But yeah.
Cool. So this is something I'm exploring. I do think that having 15 years of practicing yoga and meditation under my belt have just sensitized me to knowing what I'm feeling. And therapy of like sitting there and having someone look at you and wait when they ask you what you're feeling and you're like, shit, I don't know, but they're just going to wait for you to figure it out. That history has helped me. So if anybody listening is curious, I would say any of those practices, yoga, meditation, therapy, like if you're not sure what you're feeling, because I know for a lot of people, they don't know. And I come up against that too. Sometimes what would I do? I don't know. What do I want? I don't know. So there's that. Start with that sort of basic foundation. And oftentimes there's an initial gut instinct where like you get the request for someone to be on your podcast, or you have an opportunity that comes to you or something like that. And to watch what you would like to say. Like, so I would like to say, no, not interested. But social conditioning has made me feel that I can't say no to someone, right? Saying no isn't something that's super easy for a lot of people. So there's this initial, like, what would you do if society wasn't looking, or if you weren't going to hurt anyone's feelings? Because I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. I feel like, oh, how could I reject someone? That would make them feel bad, and I don't want to do that. But letting that stuff go and thinking about what you would do if there were no consequences or society wouldn't look differently on you. Would you dye your hair? Would you break up with your partner? Would you, start dating a woman if society didn't care, if there were no consequences in that way? And I was just making the caveat that some things you want to make sure that you are aware of the consequences, because you might not want to suffer those. So trusting that initial gut reaction of what you would choose. But then sometimes there isn't that. Like, I am about to go into a situation today that made me uncomfortable. And I was trying this practice of, well, what do I actually want? What do I actually want in this situation? And I couldn't figure it out because all of the options didn't feel right. Like, none of the options felt like there was not a clear answer to one or the other. So in that situation, I paused. So instead of responding to the email straight away, that required me to figure out what I was going to do, I just left it for 24 hours. And then and I did all the things, like I meditated, I went to the gym, I listened to some like motivational stuff. I still felt confused. I didn't have a clear answer. So, I mean, this is all very new for me, but what I landed on was I knew there was one thing that I didn't want to do out of the options I had. And so I didn't do that one. And I chose another one that felt less uncomfortable. So it was like, okay, I at least know that there's one thing I know that I definitely don't want that, even though these other options don't feel great. I'm just going to choose one of those because it was a time sensitive thing. But yeah, so just pausing and giving it time if there's not a clear answer. Yeah, I don't have anything great, but
no, I mean, it is actually as simple as that, I feel. And sometimes we really are living in the constantly responsive mode. So we always feel compelled to do something in the moment. And then, obviously, we don't have the time to listen to ourselves. And I am curious, what are the people that shaped you? And we can talk about the yoga world first, because that's something we are kind of revolving around. But then anything more personal I want to bring in is also welcome.
Yeah. So I've been shaped by a lot of people. I'm very influenced by the people that I've interacted with. You meet someone, you interact with them, and they have a profound impact on you. But the lesson you learn is what you don't want. So there's been a lot of that. But in terms of like being inspired by people in the yoga world, there are three people who I have an altar in my house, even though I don't talk about my like spiritual life a lot in my business. I keep it a little bit out of my spiritual life. I do have a very strong spiritual life. And so I have an altar in my house, and I have three people, or I did have three people on my altar who were teachers who really, really impacted me. And in the last couple of weeks, unfortunately, I've learned that two of those people have had some shady stuff going on. Mm-hmm. So if we recorded this episode a month ago, I'd probably tell you all three of those people. But right now there's just one standing that I still feel comfortable saying, yes, this person has had a really big impact on me. The other two, I have to evaluate what my relationship is. And that's happened a lot in yoga recently, is that a lot of these teachers that we looked up to as yoga teachers, sort of like the matriarchs and patriarchs of our world, very unsavory things have come out about their history. So the person that I still feel comfortable talking about actually lives in the UK at the moment, I believe. Sometimes she's in between the UK and Spain and New York, is Sarah Powers. She is an incredible yoga teacher who also has studied psychology, and that combination for me, because those are my interests, I really looked up to her still look up to her as someone to sort of model my progress in my life against, to be like, okay, this is someone who, in my opinion, fingers crossed, has integrity mm-hmm. and really is passionate about what she does, has made a very successful business in life around her teaching, but yet still has her feet on the ground and prioritizes her quality of life and her practice. So she's someone who's really influenced me and shaped me. I've done a lot of trainings with her. I've been lucky enough to interview her for my podcast and my old podcast, and her husband, who's someone I also really look up to. So in the yoga world right now, the last person standing who I can say I still feel, aligned with, at least for now, is Sarah Powers. And there's been no whispers or anything about her. I just want to make that clear. That's not like I'm waiting for her. It's just I've been disillusioned a lot with people who I really looked up to and respecting, just all these things coming out about them. So
it's a kind of thing, never meet your heroes. A little bit. Yeah. But it also says something to that everyone is a little bit of a hero. And actually I've looked up to you in many instances, because what I loved about your podcast is, again, the critical aspect that you bring to understanding yoga and the teaching and the whole community. So so I think it's very, and I'm happy that now I met you, so it's really nice. And I am curious, how does a successful day look like for you?
Yeah, great question. I've never thought about
how many different versions you have.
Yeah. A successful day to me, it sounds super mundane, but so I wake up every morning at 5, and that is a hangover from my yoga life, because I used to teach very early classes. So I became an early bird because that's what you do. When you teach at 6 a.m., you're up at 4:30, and I did that for a long time. So it's natural for me to get up at that time. So I get up at 5, and that's super important to me. I even do it on weekends, because for those first couple of hours of the day, I do practices that set me up for success, which can be different depending on where I'm at in my life. But it's something that I sort of always do, because, as I've mentioned, I do have a tendency towards anxiety. I also have a tendency towards not being the most positive person in the world. So it takes a lot of intention to set up a day for myself that is a day that I want to live, rather than, being stuck in the negative in my mind. So get up at 5, drink some coffee, and then I do whatever practices I need on that day. So usually it's like journaling, it's listening to motivational stuff and or reading books that make me feel good. I walk every day in that period. So get outside and I'm out of the weather and just get into nature, and usually meditation. So that usually takes up like the first couple of hours of my day. I like to do it before anyone's up, before anyone expects me to answer an email or anything like that. So from like 5 to 7, that is part of my successful day. If I don't do that, my days are never as successful. So like, even if I'm like, I'll sleep in on Sunday, I'll just like totally go crazy. It would have been more beneficial if I had just got up and done that. I would have like had a more positive outlook. So setting myself up for success looks like that. And then throughout the day, I have a pretty boring, like daily life. I sit at my computer right here, usually from like 8 or 9, I get on my computer and I stay there until 5 or 6. And it sounds so trivial, but like a successful day for me is completing everything I have set up for myself to do, right? Like as a self-employed person, it can be very easy if you don't have someone checking in on you to go down a rabbit hole of not being productive and then, missing targets and things that you've set for yourself. So success in that way looks like I close my laptop with the tasks that I have set out for myself to be completed. And the last thing I would say is that I usually go to the gym most days straight after work. It's because I work from home and everything is open in Sydney. Making that transition away from work, so it marks the end of my day, is quite important for me, because otherwise work can blend into after work, and there's no clear distinction of when it ends. So breaking I get out of, because I'm sitting for like 8 hours, so like I get out of that that mindset and that environment of like sitting at my desk. And so going to the gym, sometimes I go for a walk if I'm not feeling the gym, but I'll try to do something after. And I usually like listen to, again, like more books or things that I'm enjoying and inspiring, so that I also make a mental break from what I'm doing, so that I don't carry any of that stress into my evening. Yeah.
And I'm curious, when you say hit your own targets, how were you able to, let's say, calibrate the amount of work you can actually do versus putting unachievable targets?
It's not easy. This has been a constant struggle for me. A couple of things that have been helpful is reading the book Free to Focus by Michael Hyatt. It's one of my all-time top 10 books that have been impactful on me. And he teaches you how to manage your time. So implementing almost like to the letter, I've tried to implement almost everything that he teaches. So that has been helpful. Another thing that I do is I time myself quite often when I'm doing a task. So for example, after I record a podcast like this, there are tasks that I have to do. Upload the photos, write the description, do all the things, right? And so I will time myself doing that 3 or 4 times that I'm doing it, and then take the average of that amount of time and schedule that time into my calendar. Because I have a tendency to be overly optimistic with what I can get done. So I need to find ways to look at the real amount of time it actually takes me to do something, and then schedule that into my calendar. So that works with repetitive tasks that you do over and over again. If things are one-time tasks, I tend to make an honest estimate of how long I think it will take me to do it, and then double that amount of time. And optimistic. So I will, if I think it'll take me 3 hours, I know that I need to have 6 hours scheduled in my calendar. these strategies have helped, but I still do find myself looking at my weeks at certain times. And it's usually around certain times of my cycle, I feel more optimistic about what I can get done. And then at other times of my cycle, I feel resentful for my past self committing to all of these things that I have to get done. So there are still times when I look at things and I'm like, why did I do that? Or why did I schedule that in? Or, so even though I have a lot of strategies in place around it, it's not always perfect.
Yeah. I actually, around the cycle, what happens to me is that you can't predict your energy dips. And then you schedule based on your past self, and then you just get to a point where you're like, I can't do this now.
Yes, exactly.
And there's another thing that I kind of passed is, what is one truth about reality that you had the most resistance to accepting? In all of these journeys.
Oh, I just came up with a really dark one that I don't know if I should share, but I will, because it's what's come to the top of my mind. I had a really hard time accepting this, and it could fundamentally change my worldview when I accepted it. Most people who go through yoga have this experience where they come from being maybe more closed and more cynical and more skeptical. And they have this experience where they open up to love or to possibility or to trust and all of those sorts of things. I've actually had to learn the opposite, is to put up bigger boundaries, to protect myself. In all of the wisdom that we see on Instagram, on quotes, most of that shit doesn't apply to me. It's the opposite. I need to do the opposite. So the truth that came up for me that took me a really long time to accept, and I'm talking like therapy and months and months and months and months and all of this, it's super dark, is that people lie.
Yeah.
People lie.
I know.
They lie for their own benefit. And I just didn't think that was true. And like, call me naive, but I thought that most people, like, I had this conversation with a friend, like, didn't your parents tell you that you need to tell the truth? Like, does everybody get that message in childhood? And maybe, maybe people do, or maybe they don't. I don't know. But when you come to it, adult people lie for their own benefit. So that was one of the truths that took me a really long time to accept. But once I've accepted it, it has made me a bit more street smart, right? It's made me a bit more discerning. It's helped me to not be so naive in the world. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can relate to that so much, because I actually had these moments here in where I work, is that I was, you think you're doing something really wrong because this was maybe slightly forbidden. And then a colleague comes to you and he's like, oh, I just did that yesterday because, I needed to do it. And I'm like, and I immediately wrote an email, like, I'm apologizing. I know I've done something wrong, and then suddenly, like, no, I mean, I've just done it because I needed to do it, and it's fine. I mean, these are not like, crimes, but still you experience them internally as crimes.
Yeah.
So I can completely relate to that. And I'm actually very curious, did you, because I am currently as well going through therapy, and I'm curious, how do you work with that, almost like I don't have the word for it, but kind of internal policeman that is kind of constantly telling you you're not good enough, like you are not truthful enough. And what is really for you truthful enough? That's always like such a thin line for me. I don't know.
Yeah. Look, I don't think I have a good explanation for how I do that. Like, there's a white lie that I may tell today. And I've been agonizing over, excuse me, whether or not to tell the white lie or to just tell the truth. It's like, it's super minor. It's like, it's nothing, But it's the equivalent of like someone saying, hey, do you want to come out tonight? And you say, no, you're busy, but you're at home watching TV, right? It's the equivalent. We're talking like that thing. But I have been thinking about it for a good 24 hours of, do I say it or do I not? Do I say it or do I not? So I don't know. I don't know how to manage this, but I think for the most part, I'm okay with the fact that I'm agonizing over a white lie. I think I'm okay with that. I think I don't, for me personally, at this moment in time, it totally might change. I think I'm okay with that's who I am, right? But what I've realized is not everybody's like that, right? Like your friend who said, oh, I do that all the time, or, no big deal. Whereas I was putting my experience onto everyone else. Like, surely if I'm agonizing over a white lie, people wouldn't tell really important lies, So, but I think I'm okay with being that kind of person who tells the fucking truth. Like, you know what I mean? For the most part, really tries to be an honest person. I don't know if I want to change that. But what I am getting better at is not telling white lies. This is why I'm agonizing over it, to make someone else feel better.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think I'm just not going to say anything. If the person asks, I'm going to tell the truth, not the white lie. But I'm not going to, because the white lie would make that person feel better. Right? So what I'm thinking of is just not doing that, not needing to soothe someone else.
Yeah. And it's difficult.
Yeah, it's so difficult. It's so difficult.
And actually, the last question I want to ask around the business, and just before we kind of go to the rapid fire questions, is behind the scenes of what actually happens in an online business is a very interesting thing for me, because it almost feels like there is an American dream being sold, and actually since I appreciate your Instagram because it is honest in that sense. So I'm curious, what is real life of someone who has an online business?
I think there are parallels to having a regular business. So I think that there are certain things that are not super distinguishable, like the fact that it will take a while to make a profit. Like, I made a profit in my first year, but it was small. And I shared my real numbers with the people in my membership because I'm teaching them to start businesses. So I feel if they're doing this, they need a real behind the scenes look of how much revenue I made, how much my expenses were, how much I pay my team, those sorts of things. So I think in some ways that is similar to what happens in any business, although an online business has lower overhead, which is something that I'm, after being a co-owner in brick and mortar physical yoga studios that we pay rent, I'm very much more positive about online business because of the lower overhead, plus because of COVID. Like, I'm thinking that when I coach people, I might start screening people that if you have a brick and mortar business, I'm not the right coach for you because I'm not sure if I believe in that business model right now. It seems really risky, and there are a lot of things out of one's control. So certain things are similar in terms of it'll take a while to make a profit. Overheads are lower, which is great. But I think there is an American dream of having a laptop lifestyle, sitting by the pool, and drinking margaritas or whatever in Bali while you run your online business and make money while you sleep. That's the dream, right? That we're being sold on YouTube ads. The reality is, it is still running a business, right? So that means there is a lot of work. I coach a lot of people who are new to business, brand new to business. They've never run a business before in their life. And one common theme for most of the folks is that they are shocked that it's a lot of work. Like I will actually, they will say that, like, I looked into doing X, Y, and Z, but it's so much work. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it is. It is 100%. It's a lot of work. So I think that the sitting by your pool and making money while you sleep thing has done a really big disservice to people, especially people who have like corporate jobs and they're like, I want that lifestyle. So I'm going to quit my corporate job and do that, drink margaritas by the pool and make money while I sleep. What I would hope for folks who, whether they have a corporate job or not, but are thinking of starting a business, an online business, my experience, this is not everyone's, but my experience is that you will need to put the same amount of time and effort and work into your online business for it to be successful as you do your corporate job. But it's your own business. So that's awesome. Like, you know, that's not a, in my mind, that's not a bad thing. And you may have a potential to earn a lot more if you learn about business and you're super smart about it. But my experience, you're not going to do that in 10 hours a week. You're probably going to do that in 40 or 50 hours a week. And maybe when you're more established, you do that in 30 hours a week because you've got teams and systems and products and advertising all sort of set up and running. But in the beginning, it's a lot of work. And I'm happy to do that. I am not complaining. I love working. I love what I do. So there's that side that it's, and I also think that consumers are much more savvy right now in 2021 than they were in 2010 or 2015, meaning that a lot of those strategies of passive income, I haven't seen them to be super effective. Mm-hmm. So they can be, I think they can be, but the dream of like making money while you sleep is people don't necessarily want to buy products right now, at least that I'm seeing, that don't have a live component, that you're not showing up for live and connecting with people. And the idea of like a pre-recorded course or a pre-recorded something, I think they can work, especially if they are a lower price point. Like there's something that's like $29 or $50 maybe, but people are suffering a little bit from like online fatigue, especially through COVID. And the completion rate of products like that, like if someone buys a marketing course for $59, that there's no live element, often people will just buy it and it will sit there and they won't use it. So you're not going to get those like rave reviews and you're not going to help people actually get results because they're not going to engage with it. So, and people also more now than ever have a lack of trust, you know? Yeah. People don't feel like they can trust their government. People don't feel like they can trust their police. People don't feel like they can trust, you know, basically anyone. So trust requires relationship and you showing up, which it's not as easy to build trust on like a pre-recorded video as it is on something live. So I don't know if that's busting anyone's bubble who's listening, but it takes work. Expect not to profit in the beginning. That's normal. You know, take your time. 18 to 24 months is when businesses usually break a profit. Overheads are lower. But yeah, the laptop lifestyle is not something that that running an online business, for me at least, is a real picture. It's like the bikini handstand on the beach is not that you see on Instagram.
Not yoga.
It's not the real yoga. It's kind of, I feel kind of the same thing with business.
Yeah. And actually, I'm curious, what brings you joy in your business?
Oh, in my business. Okay, cool.
We can extend it to life.
Well, in life, I will say this. I love pets and animals, but my partner and I, because we're maybe considering a move, we're not quite sure what we're doing. It's not responsible for us to get a pet. But one of the reasons why I walk every day is I go to a place where other people walk their dogs. And I just like have these little moments with all of these dogs that it's like literally it makes my day. I'm like, and I will come home and tell my partner, did you see that dog? What about this dog happened? Blah, blah, blah. So pets give me joy. In my business, what else gives me joy? One of the things is creating something from nothing. And seeing people be genuinely helped by it. So creating a new product that didn't exist before. So you've just made it up. It's come out of me or whoever is making it. And then it actually genuinely helping people. That gives me a lot of joy. It feels like what I'm doing is worthwhile and important. That also, to be fully transparent, making money. I think that, especially after having gone through that like dark night of the soul where I kind of lost everything, there's just joy in receiving an exchange for what I'm doing. Because if all they do is give, myself included, resentment can build up. Yeah. If all you do is give, there can be resentment. But that feeling into that flow of giving, and then also receiving in terms of money coming into my bank account, I like that. It gives me joy to be like, cool, Stripe payment is on the way. Like, I enjoy that too. So genuinely helping people, creating new things, making money, and dogs.
Yeah. So now I will just go to this rapid fire questions so we can slowly wrap up. So one of the things I normally ask is, what is an absurd thing about you that not many people know that you are willing to share?
Absurd. Okay. Two things come in that people are surprised about sometimes. First one is and this is not crazy or absurd. I go to bed ridiculously early. So I'm like in bed by like 7 or 8 p.m. It's not fun. It's not cool. I'm a total grandma. The second thing is like the amount of food that I eat is ridiculous. And it's kind of absurd. People will look at my plate and be like, you are going to eat that? Yes, I'm going to eat that. And then I'm going to eat it again. So those are two things. I go to bed super early and I eat a bunch of food.
Okay. And what kind of compliments, if any, do you like to receive?
I like to receive all compliments. I'll take any compliment. You can compliment me on my, my hair, my business, whatever. I'm all for it.
Okay. And then which are things that you have become more, and which are things that have become less important with you with age? For you, sorry.
I've definitely become more I've become more discerning. So as we kind of just, talked about, getting a little bit more streetwise. So I've become more discerning with age. And with age, I've also become less social. So I've become more introverted and more interested in that kind of quiet, still life than I was before. So less social, less going out, less partying, that kind of stuff.
And the last one is, actually, can I first ask, can you tell the story of the other tattoo?
Yeah.
Because I'm looking at it all the time and I'm like, well, I can't.
Which one? I've got so many. That one?
So that's the one I see, but you can share which. I would like to hear. I like tattoo stories, so go for it.
This one's not that exciting. It's just a snake represents transformation. And spiritual growth in a lot of yoga traditions is a snake moving upwards. So I've got a snake moving upwards, transformation and growth. The cool tattoo is that one, which is actually just a slice of pizza, like a little pizza slice. Yeah. And the reason why I got that tattoo was that my now partner has never had a tattoo before, and he wanted one. And I didn't need one. I was good with what I had, but I wanted to be with him in that experience. And I was like, well, I'll just get a slice of pizza on my arm. And I like it because I tend to overthink things and be super like pondering stuff over. And having that slice of pizza on my arm reminds me to not take myself so seriously, because I have a slice of pizza on my arm. It's ridiculous. So it helps me to live a little bit and not overthink things so much. So that one I like the story of a little bit more.
I have to say, this is just a perfect way to end. And I would just like to ask, is there anything you would like to ask yourself, in the sense that, is there something that no one has ever picked up and you were kind of dying to share, but no one has seen that?
No, yes and no. So there's one thing. My friends and family, some of them do, but the vast majority of them don't necessarily get my sense of style and my sense of like my look that I'm going for, and would love me to, especially I'm thinking of like a couple people, like, look more like the standard American, even though I'm Canadian, like version of beauty, like, fake tan, all of that, like sort of stuff. And I'm just not into that. And so I get paid out a little bit by some of my friends and stuff about that. And last year, and I'm always like, but it's not that I'm not trying. My style is intentional. Like, I'm doing this on purpose. And they're like, okay, I would never do that on purpose. But anyhow, and so last year I got featured in a street style magazine. And because I was just walking down the street and someone was a photographer for a street style magazine, stopped me and asked if they could take my photo. And for me, this was validation. I felt so validated because I'm like, see, I am cool. And you guys just don't know it because you have a different aesthetic than I do. So that's something that I like. When that happened to me, I was like broadcasting it everywhere because, that's something that, is super silly, but it's like when you don't feel seen and heard, it affects you, even if it's on a simple little thing like your personal style. So no one asked me about that because it's not really relevant, which is totally cool. But I just love that story in that, sometimes all you need is one person to validate you, and then you can believe in yourself a little bit more, even if it's not the norm or what the people around you think is the right path or whatever. So that's all. Or
on the other side, if you really feel it, just keep on trusting it in a way.
Doing it. Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for this conversation. I really enjoyed it. You have just heard the story of Cora Geroux. She has been working in the wellness industry for over a decade. She spent the first half of her career doing the group class hustle as a yoga teacher, and she now helps yoga teachers, wellness practitioners, and creatives learn the business skills they need to share their personal brand of magic with the world. Cora is the host of the Teaching Yoga podcast, founder of the Teachers Club, has a BA in psychology, and is a qualified life coach. You can connect with her on Instagram at Cora Geroux, or find more information on her work on www.corageroux.com. Thank you for joining me on this episode, and I hope you will continue to walk along with me in this journey.